Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Young Farmers podcast episode in which we're talking about tenants, landlords, collaboration, and how you can develop your path into agriculture. I'm Ben Eagle. I'm a rural affairs podcaster, and I'll be asking the questions today. Back at the end of November, we released the first of these episodes looking at land access, and I encourage you to go back and listen to that if you haven't already. That episode featured Chris Lake, who is a YFC member from Cambridgeshire. Today, however, we're moving away from talking about conventional tenancy agreements and broadening the discussion to be more creative in terms of share farming agreements, joint ventures, and enterprise stacking. And if you don't know what any of those are, then hopefully by the end of listening to this, you will be clearer. Who knows, it might just spark an idea that you could take forwards. Our case study today is that of Jonty Brunyee, who is a National Trust tenant farmer in the Cotswolds. Jonty will tell us about his farming journey and how he has used enterprise stacking on his farm to build the business, but also provide space for new entrants on his farm. I'm also joined by a panel of guests, and together, alongside Jonty himself, we're going to discuss Jonty's case and suggest what opportunities there might be for younger and new entrants to the industry away from the farm business tenancy option. So before we introduce our panel, Jonty, I'm going to turn to you. Thank you so much for doing this. First of all, I suppose, can you tell us about your route into agriculture, first of all, and how you got a National Trust tenancy at Conagry Farm in the Cotswolds?
Sure, thanks, Ben. So I grew up on a tenanted holding in Nottinghamshire, an arable farm, 3 elder brothers. So I was never going to really farm at home. So I went down the environmental route at quite a young age, at college, at university, and my first job as a FWAG advisor back in the 90s. I never thought I'd farm, you know. I thought the routes into farming were too hard for me, and I wasn't desperately attracted by big tractors and lots of animals. And as the industry was getting bigger and more intensive, I was kind of turned off by it. But then decoupling, cap change, countryside stewardship really took off, higher level schemes. I got a little bit more excited. I was actually driving through the Cotswolds one day, doing some advisory work, and I saw a sign, farm to let, and I just followed it. And I turned up at an open day by mistake, and it was a National Trust farm here in the Cotswolds. I remember walking on farm, and I knew a few people here, and they said, "What on earth are you doing here?" I said, "I might apply for this place," joking. I picked up the letting particulars, read through them, and it just hit me right between the eyes that I could do this. I had enough skills, energy. I read the objectives. It's a National Trust farm, and it was about farmland birds, species-rich grassland, native breeds, direct selling, landscape protection, nature-friendly farming, maybe organic, maybe pasture-fed farming. And I thought, I can do that. So I put a business plan together. I listened to what the landlord wanted and realised it resonated with what I wanted. And I think that's the first thing to any young tenant, potential new entrant, is make sure whatever you do, it fits with what you want, your motivation, it makes you smile. I think we can set people up to fail sometimes, so we have to be really careful of that. So it fitted with my motivations. So I spent quite a lot of time doing a business plan and chanced my arm, and I got an interview, a second interview, I think it was a third interview, and I finally got the farm in 2004, let to me on a 10-year farm business tenancy. It was let, interestingly, as a part-time farm, and pick me up on this later about if it is still a part-time farm and what does that actually mean.
Some may question that.
Absolutely. But the idea was it was let as a part-time farm so that whoever came in didn't try and push it too hard from the outset. So we had the idea was a few cattle, particularly as a conservation grazing operation, a few sheep, maybe Cotswold sheep, our local rare breed. They encouraged us to add value. And they encouraged us to get into countryside stewardship and very quickly into higher level scheme, environmental stewardship as it was, for species-rich grassland. And that's what I did. And I started gently. I worked off farm half the week as well as an advisor and as a consultant for various bodies. And that's how it sat for about 5 years as I got to know the farm, got my feet under the table, and actually realised I knew nothing and had none of the skills.
I mean, and it's really when you started farming with your wife Mel that things changed. So I wonder if we can just fast forward to then. How did they change, and how did you work with the National Trust, with your landlord, to facilitate those changes?
Yeah, so I guess I farmed quite traditionally at the start. I did what the neighbours did. It's always the best way. I learn from your neighbours a little bit and speak to people over the hedge. But Mel was in conservation grazing for Norfolk Wildlife Trust. So she came with some different skills, and she told me to go even more extensive, move towards a pasture-fed system, encouraged me to move from, say, lambing in January, February, rare breeds, trying to show animals, to cut out all concentrate, lamb in May when the grass is growing, and really go for the environmentally focused business. So we did, and we increased cattle numbers, we increased wildflower numbers, we increased farmland bird numbers, stewardship income went up too, and I really started to enjoy it properly, deep down, heartfelt stuff. Mel and I farmed together. She slowly took over the reins, and I continue to work off farm a little bit too.
Okay. You did a Nuffield scholarship, and you're already an organic farmer. You were thinking outside the box a bit, but I'm interested in how that Nuffield impacted on you in terms of your regenerative thinking, especially enterprise stacking, which is what we're going to be talking about today, joint ventures, starting additional enterprises on the farm. And I'm just going to list some of those that you have: market gardening, PPs, events, and this was all with the blessing of your landlord. So can you just tell us about that period and bring us up to date to where you are today?
Yeah, I think Nuffield was a light bulb moment for me, really. I was very lucky. I'd started working at the Royal Agricultural University teaching farm business management, but I really wanted to know what sustainable farm business management meant. So I was very lucky, traveled the world, America, Canada, Italy, China, Hong Kong, Romania, which was my favorite place on my travels. I really wanted to get under the skin of agroecology, I guess, and sustainability, and going beyond sustainability, going a bit deeper. And that's when I came across regenerative agriculture, regenerative thinking, particularly in America. Spent time with Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, heard Gabe Brown at a conference. And it just changed the way I felt. I realized what we had been doing was doing conservation, protecting what we had today for tomorrow. Whereas what we needed to do is regenerate, improve, enhance, rebuild, reconnect. So that's about improving soil, rebuilding biodiversity, improving water and nutrient cycles, and reconnecting with our community and our consumers. So when I came back from my Nuffield, I put that at the heart of my teaching at the RAU, and I put it at the heart of the new vision for Conigry as well, and went even deeper. And at that time, the National Trust were very supportive. And they offered us a new tenancy, a 20-year tenancy. So I'd had nearly 10. The trust gave us another 20 and added Mel to the tenancy, which is quite rare, actually, a joint tenancy for a nice period. That gave us confidence to invest more time, money, and energy. And that's when we decided to really go for it, to diversify even further. Beef, sheep, pigs, market garden, which I'll come on to a little bit more, events business, weddings, glamping, beehives, horses. We've got a livery here too. I think we've got about 13 different enterprises contributing. And I still do a bit of work off farm as well, and I count that as a diversification. And I put countryside stewardship as a diversification too, as a separate income stream with inputs and outputs. And that kind of got us to about 4 years ago, when we really launched all our diversification businesses, just pre-COVID.
Thank you for that fairly comprehensive overview of your business. And I'm intrigued what the panel is going to make of this. So let's introduce them. First up, I'm joined once again by George Dunn, who is Chief Executive of the Tenant Farmers Association. Also with me is Martin Lines, a Cambridgeshire farmer and CEO of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. And finally, Andrew Shirley, who is a Chief Surveyor at the Country Land and Business Association. Welcome to you all. Thanks for doing this. Can I ask you, first of all, let's just go around the room, and can you give me your initial take on Jonty's story, first of all, and rather like last time, whether there's anything in particular, and there's lots here, that jumps out to you. George, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So good to be part of this really interesting podcast, and great to hear the detail of Jonty's story. I knew a little bit about it, but to hear that in the passion and detail that he's delivered, it has been fantastic. And I think a couple of things jump out for me. I think what Jonty said about making sure that you have an understanding of what the landlord wants to achieve from the holding is really important, because obviously you can't push against the aspirations and the ethos of the landlord in terms of what they want to achieve for the holding. So understand a little bit about what the landlord wants, and make sure that that fits with your aspirations and your ideas. But also, I think there's a rare confluence here which brings together the aptitude and skill and entrepreneurial flair that Jonty clearly brings here, with a very open-handed and collegiate approach from his landlord. And it shows what can be done when both parties have a desire to and a willingness to act collegiately and work together. And it should certainly be something of a beacon that others can look to and potentially aspire to, because at the moment it's a pretty rare thing. Andrew,
your takeaways so far?
Thank you very much for having me on the podcast. And I think the thing that I noticed particularly about Jonty and his plan, he'd got quite a clear vision in his head that he wanted to do something slightly different from the norm. And it's coming up with a different vision, a different way ahead. And I think we have to remember, agriculture is changing hugely in terms of support, and therefore everyone is going to be looking at different opportunities out there. And it's a question of how far you have to throw yourself into these opportunities. And I think what Jonty's proven is that is possible. And it's actually looking for that niche, looking for what you can do, looking for what you can negotiate when you take out a tenancy that meets your own aspiration as a tenant and a farmer, as well as meeting those that the landlord requires. It's always much easier to work in partnership. And quite a lot of these things actually do depend on some input from the landlord. It's not necessarily always the input of the tenant. And if you can do things jointly, that actually reduces the burden on both, and builds a sustainable, good future that is going to provide the operator with a good return.
Martin?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it's a great program to be part of. For me, it's that having shared alignment with what your landlord wants, and so there's at least symmetry going on. There was the maintaining some off-farm income, so you're not completely reliant on one thing. Keeping that on off-farm income going for a little while till your business settles in, and then make the decision. Do you keep it going or do you fully launch in? I really picked up on the comment around working within the capacity of the landscape, moving away from a system of buying lots in and writing lots of checks out, to working with what nature can give you and when grass growth is, and fitting your farming system in to the capacity of what your grass and your system can give you. And that can give you a lot more security. And around that security, around certainly picking up the point around having a longer tenancy that gives you security as a tenant to invest into it. We have too many short tenancies that everyone's on they don't actually invest in improving the landscape and the business and the habitat and nature, because you're not sure how long you're going to be there. So I think that was a real pickup point of, we really need to see some longer tenancies, and that shared ambition of where both landlord and tenant can work to get towards, to make the asset of the landscape really drive a viable farming business.
Thank you, Martin. I want to talk definitions in a bit, but before we do, Jonty, I wonder if you can tell us more about the market garden operation and perhaps how that came about.
Brilliant. The market garden, I think, is probably the best thing we've ever done here at Connigree Farm. And I didn't think it was possible, but a young man knocked on our door about 4 years ago and said, "Jonty, I'm looking for 3 acres. I want to develop an organic no-dig market garden." I said, "You're mad. This is the Cotswolds. We've got 6 inches of stone. You can't grow potatoes and lettuce here." He said, "No, you can. No dig. We'll build soil." I said, "Okay, let me think about it." And I thought about it for 3 minutes. I said, "Where do I sign?" And he'll no joke, because I'd been looking at joint ventures on my Nuffield and how to stack people as well as enterprises and how to work with others, which is, I think, I can only do so much, Mel can only do so much. So we've been thinking about how do we get new blood, new people onto the farm and reconnect a little bit more with others with different skills. So when James Butterworth came down the drive, I said, yeah, let's do this, but let's go to the National Trust and speak to them first. And they were very supportive. So we signed a joint venture agreement. James is 90% partner. We're a 10. So we've got skin in the game. We're still the tenant. We help him. We gave him a route to market because we've been selling beef and lamb for sort of 15 years before that. And we built a wonderful 3-acre market garden, about 90 different crops in the ground, delivering to 50 people every week, plus local pubs, restaurants. And the market garden now turns over more than anything else on the farm. It's the hardest element of the farm as well. You try picking leeks at 5 a.m. every morning.
Yeah.
It's hard work, but it's brought people and fresh produce. So when people say, how can your nature-friendly agroecological system feed the planet? I say, go and look at the market garden. Loads of food coming out of there, and it's nutrient dense too, and more jobs.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jonty. I'm conscious that we're throwing quite a few terms around. So, Andrew, I'm going to turn to you on some definitions. Joint ventures, first of all. What do we mean by joint venture? Because a lot of these terms, some people can maybe use them interchangeably, but they are different. So what's a joint venture?
A joint venture is essentially when you've got two or perhaps more parties that join together and come together to run a business or take part in a business, and that might be producing expertise, or it might be, further investment in a business that enables you to do and achieve more than you would do on your own. So it is a wide definition. It could involve input by the landowner. It could involve partnership between neighbouring farmers, neighbouring tenants. It can be anything that you share. So you both have a risk in the business, and you both, commit to delivering something as part of that business. And I think that's the important thing. You both have a risk. You both have an opportunity out of taking part. And it enables you, as I say, to do more than you could do if it was just you on your own.
What about enterprise stacking?
Well, for me, Ben, I think
go for it.
So I think like a lot of modern phrases that we use today, it probably has an older meaning, and those of us within the industry that have been around a long time would probably say it probably means mixed farming. Obviously down the years we've seen a lot of specialization, people being specialist arable or specialist beef or specialist dairy or specialist pigs. But we're now seeing people like Jonty reimagine and relearn some of the old things that happened within the industry, where we had a mix of enterprises on the farm, and we see farm businesses spreading their risk by having those multiple enterprises operating side by side, and not just farming enterprises, but also non-farming enterprises, public-facing offerings, natural capital enterprises, renewable energy, retail, commercial activities, including storage, office lets, maybe. Often there's an aim to have a bit of a symbiosis between all of the enterprises so that you're maximizing the time and space that's available to you. And also enterprise stacking, as Jonty has just described, gives you the opportunity to bring in others into the business, into the space that you're operating within. And that can be a bit tricky in a landlord-tenant situation. So the fact that the National Trust has been open-handed in that respect has been really good. But yeah, bringing others on the journey as well is part of enterprise stacking.
Yeah, thanks, George. I think that nuance is bang on. Diversification to me is about taking assets, building another business. Enterprise stacking is seeking the synergies. And then you can stack them. Some might be loss leaders, some might not offer very much capital, finance or income, but they might provide manure for the market garden. Agroforestry, no return for 20 years, but I want the wood chip for my market garden. So there's not always financial value in enterprise stacking. There's others too. So concise two-chip margins, nectar mixers for beehives. And then you've got pollinators. Now things are starting to link together. So for me, it's going a little bit further than simple sort of that farm diversification.
Something I'm really interested in this case is Jonty's relationship with the collection now of people who he has agreements with, but also with the landlord, and this sort of sitting place of the tenant in between. George, how common is this? How common is this with other cases? Do you see this often?
Yeah, Ben, I think as I alluded to in answering some of your other questions, particularly when you said what jumped out about Jonty's story, is that this isn't a framework that you see routinely across the landlord tenant sector. Whereas Martin says, we're dominated by short-term agreements with landlords taking a pretty risk-averse approach and not really being keen to share risk with tenants or allow tenants to bring in other individuals to assist them in their aspirations. Now, we are seeing some change in this direction, and we are seeing some landlords being much more open-handed in this respect. And obviously, with the ROC review and the Farm Tenancy Forum that's been established and the code of practice that's being written, we're seeing moves in this direction. But I would have to say at the moment, as a tenant farmer, Jonty's experience is currently the exception rather than the rule. But I think if we can have more beacon examples like Jonty and the National Trust, then many more landlords will feel confident about the willingness to get involved in that type of enterprise.
Martin, do you see anyone across the nature-friendly farming network doing anything similar?
Yeah, and it seems to be a growing area. Sort of 3 or 4 years ago, it was an exception. But certainly within England, as we see the BPS removed, people are starting to think differently. You're suddenly thinking, well, I haven't locked into claiming my BPS. What could I do with that small field or that corner? What other things can I do? And we're seeing people, typical is usually the early entries are the moving sheep flocks around, and then market gardens, beehives, some habitat management, some just woodland management. Farmers are starting to realise they've built a business in the past where they may be the sole operator and it's a lonely space and they want to do more and they haven't got the skills or the assets or the knowledge, and bringing people in. And that's where I'm starting to see a lot of those conversations of new people looking access to land to start something, but also many other people on the other side saying, I'm interested in this. I'm interested in that. And I think that's the role for the network and other organisations, to get those messages out, to say, actually, have you thought about welcoming someone else in or diversifying? It's not diversifying, it's other opportunities within your landscape, and who's best to help you get that output out, and stacking their enterprises and looking at the systems approach rather than just an output approach.
Jonty, thinking of new entrants listening to this, what advice would you give to them in terms of just the starting process, starting a joint venture?
First thing always is just be open-minded, be thirsty for knowledge, join in a local community and knowledge exchange group. That might be Pasture for Life, nature-friendly farming. Be a sponge. I've helped let a few farms in the past, and I'm still alarmed at how narrow-minded lots of young farmers still are to change and to different ways of working. I'm meeting a lot more now with some great ideas and enthusiasm and skills, and they're blowing me away, but we still need more. And don't let access to land be the barrier. As Martin says, go and knock on someone's door, just like James Butterworth did here. See if you can mob graze someone's pastures. See if you can get onto those cover crops. Lots of farmers do want people alongside them. So it's not always about farm business tenancies here.
And a message to landlords as well. I mean, there are some applications out there that sort of encourage more, I'm going to call it thinking outside the box, but what would your message be to landlords who might be approached by someone wanting to engage in a joint venture? Or it could be someone like yourself, a tenant who is approached as well.
I think just take a risk. You've got to invest in those young tenants. Take some, share some risks, and you will get outcomes and outputs at the end of it. It might not always be higher rent. It'll be other benefits.
Andrew, this is probably your bag. So landlords, advice to them?
Always be open to good ideas and new investment opportunities that come in. And I think that, my starter would be that start that conversation. Don't necessarily start it with the sort of farm business tenancy you want to see. The farm business tenancy might not be an appropriate route to go down. You might want greater involvement. So it's actually setting your as a potential occupier of land, setting your vision, where you want to get to, and then actually what's the best vehicle to achieve that. That it might be a partnership, it might be a joint company, it might be a tenancy, it could be a contract farming agreement. There's lots of different opportunities out there. But what you want to do is set yourself up so you can have a lasting agreement that enables you to meet all your objectives, both as landlord and a tenant. And I think the thing that is quite noticeable with Jonty is his enthusiasm, commitment, and vision. And I think that those are the people that are going to steer us throughout the future. Things are changing, and I think we need to grasp that change. And I think from a landowner's point of view, clearly, whatever management you set yourself to, it's actually having the understanding of both parties about the direction you're going in, and then a lot can be achieved.
Something that was very clear from your story, Jonty, is the relationship building side, which is something that you yourself have mentioned. Building this relationship over time with your landlord and with potential landlords, I suppose, as well. Just a comment from you on that.
Yeah, it's about open dialogue. We try and over-deliver here for environmental purposes. So we deliver the National Trust aims and then go another step further. So that's one reason they've been very supportive, is that there's a sense of trust there, which I think is really important. And, share your ideas early and get them on board. And it's worked for us. I mean, the events business, TPs and glamping tents, which is another joint venture, by the way, with someone leaving the army. The beehives, it's a gentleman's handshake with someone else, a different type of joint venture. They're all things we ran past the National Trust and discussed with them. And then the next stage, the Trust came to us and said, we'd like to plant some trees. Could you help us? I said, yeah, please. We want more shelter belts. It'll fit really well with the market garden, with the events business. So that, again, those synergies, when you're talking to each other, do start to arise.
George, relationship building is something that we spoke of quite a bit in the last episode as well. Why is it so important?
It's absolutely key, Ben, that we have a situation where there's good relationships between landlords and tenants. Very few tenanted businesses are going to thrive when they're constantly in dispute with their landlords or looking over their shoulder at what might be coming down the track with their landlords. Disputes are expensive in terms of time, energy, money, and drive. So the more that you can work together, the better. What's been quite surprising to me is that we're just talking to our members at the moment about how they see their relationships with their landlords, and surprisingly, 70% of those that we're asking don't have regular meetings with their landlords, which is, unbelievable when you consider the story that Jonty's come forward. And around 40% of people say that it's not even easy to talk to their landlord or get a hold of their landlord, which is really difficult when we're looking at some of these things. But it should always be about parties working together, creating as big a pie as possible to share between them according to who's got the skin in the game. But going back to what we said earlier, it's really important that tenants understand their landlords and their reasons for owning the land and what they're bringing to the party. But sometimes that's not always easy when things are conducted through land agents or other advisors. You don't really get a full sense of what the landlord wants. But certainly having a good relationship means you're going to have a better basis to drive a better business and a bigger pie for everybody.
Jonty, do you think there's anything holding this sort of approach back? And when I mean this approach, I mean the sort of more creative side of drawing up joint ventures and building those relationships. What could improve the situation?
There are risks, there are barriers. Access to land, we mentioned length of tenancies, capital, understanding what's needed as well, and knowledge and about regulation. And I think landlords are nervous of tenancy regulations of joint ventures and liabilities, and they're not fully engaged with the transition and that deep regenerative transition and what that really means. So I think there's a mindset shift needed from both parties. Sorry,
just in the back of what Jonty was saying there, landlords sometimes are accidental landlords because they've inherited or they weren't expecting to have the position of being a landlord. They don't always know what they can do with the land that they've got, and a lot of it relies upon how they are advised themselves by their land agents and by solicitors and others that are responsible for assisting them. And what we see routinely from some of the land agent community is they take a very risk averse approach to how opportunities are handled. They go for the standardized FBT agreement that's been in the drawer for years. It's a short-term agreement, so they have an opportunity to have another go in 3 or 4 years' time. We need landlords agents to be much more holistically aware of all of this stuff and to be prepared to help their clients through understanding what this means for them and how this can benefit both parties. So yeah, we need to break this risk-averse culture, definitely.
Martin, and then we'll go to Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I find and seen many landlords just want a simple agreement. It just, bang, it's out, it's done. When you start stacking enterprises and opportunities, does the agent need to get involved? Is it another refresher agreement? Is it another cost? So that risk averse thing in it, it's about setting it up. So there is opportunity to have those conversations and add enterprises in without having to redraw agreements all the time and add costs back into it. And I think we're going to have a real shift from many of the landlords now to really think about how do we want to manage tenants on our landscape and how do we want to make them have the opportunities of all the opportunities that are now coming forward around habitat schemes and different markets and different outputs and local food systems and that opportunity to bring people back into our landscapes or into their landscapes, which actually drive a more secure business. So as you're going to have a tenant that has a better chance of staying there.
I think things are changing quite quickly. And I've said this several times throughout this interview. I think things are moving at a pace. And I think what you want is a clarity of vision and the ability to deliver that. And I think, that is coming through. And people will be looking for different solutions. But again, it's being able not only just to say, we're going to allow the tenant to go into stewardship or we're going to allow the tenant to go into landscape recovery or something. It's going to be much more detailed than that. What does that actually look like on the ground? What's it going to deliver? How's that going to fit in? And actually, can it fit in better if we work together rather than work in landowner and tenant silos? There's a lot that can be achieved. And I think, we are entering an exciting time when there's lots of different potential revenue streams. And also, as Jonty's proved, it's the link to the local community and the external markets as well. There's a huge amount of people that can have buy-in to a business. Yeah, starting with, a vision and where you want to go with your landlord is a good start, and it needn't be as complicated as everyone makes out it is, but it is about engagement and about conversations and about shared vision, and it's all possible.
Yeah, shared vision. I think that's an important thing to take away. In part of the reason for doing this podcast in the first place, and it's something that we referred to quite a bit in the first episode, is to encourage new entrants, younger farmers to think outside the conventional route of farm tenancy and actually think about other options. George, you were talking, especially in the last episode again, about don't be afraid of actually go and get a job. Look at those other options that are out there. But the bigger picture question here, I suppose, for all of you is, should we be encouraging as an industry, and I'm thinking also especially here with the launch of TIA as well and training opportunities, should we be encouraging more people, more young entrants to begin joint ventures? Broad question. Who wants to start? Martin, can I go to you?
Easy answer is yes, we need to. We have an aging pot farming population. Having new people, new blood, new ideas will actually drive our industry on in a more positive way. And sort of, how do we get them on board, giving them the opportunities and the space, and that will make a thriving farming sector in the future. And it's trying to give everybody the opportunity of coming together and seeing those opportunities where you can do a bit down the road, and what is your local opportunity? Who can be part of that? If we don't, the risk will be we won't be able to deliver a farming system in the future because there'll be a sudden change. Or what we might see is the amalgamatum of many farms and large farming units, and then we really miss out the people and those rural business and rural community opportunities of having people back on the land.
George, should we be encouraging more joint ventures?
Yeah, Ben, what I said in the last podcast about get a job was not necessarily being, the be all and end all of your career, but sometimes it's good to make your mistakes at other people's risk and to learn a bit about life before you branch out into your own business. But I mean, there will always be people who will come straight into a business opportunity. But even Jonty described his journey here as doing lots of other things before he even contemplated applying for a tenancy and taking that on and being a business in his own account. So get a bit of life experience, get a bit of knowledge, do in that field and look at what's going on in the world before you try and leap into business. But yeah, joint ventures are absolutely, bona fide ways in which to take these things forward. But you just need to make sure that all parties are entering into these joint arrangements with their eyes open. Sometimes landowners particularly go into a joint venture not really appreciating the extent to which they will be experiencing risk in that joint venture. And in the end, it turns out to be more like a landlord-tenant relationship because the landlord backs away from the operation. So long as people are clear about what it is they are doing, why they're doing it, what both parties or more than two parties are putting in, and that you have a proper structured agreement, then absolutely joint ventures are a perfectly sensible way to take some of these things forward.
Yeah, clarity. I think that's a key point here as well. Jonty, I'm going to go over to you, perhaps a comment on that, but also I'm just interested in your experience because so far we've said a lot of positive, and as we know in life, it's not all about the positive. So are there any downsides of joint ventures or enterprise stacking that you've experienced, or perhaps rephrasing that, anything to be aware of going into this, the risks?
Where to start on that one? Yes, number one, it's really, really hard work. You're going to have to work 7 days a week, 365 days a year to get the new businesses off the ground, and some will fail. And so financial risk is always there. Mental well-being, we work so hard and it is scary. So you've got to be pretty resilient, and you've got to try and make sure you do get time away as well. I've always encouraged block a week or two out your diary, go away, get off farm, because it will drive you up the wall a little bit too. So yes, there's mental risk, there's financial risk. Some things will fail. On the failure point, I'd always make sure I don't like the word exit strategy. I prefer conclusion strategy. Your businesses will have to come to an end at some point. Either you're too old, or whether there's succession, or whether you want to sell it, or whether you just want to close it. Think about what it means long term. Are there any assets, particularly as a tenant, any asset value there? Might be a good idea to sell it before it's run down to nothing. So I think, keep looking ahead. You'll always need new skills. I'd encourage people to Google the 9 stages of enterprise development by Dr. David Boswood. Stage 1 is you've got an idea. You've probably been to Oxford Real Farming Conference or Groundswell and come home with a new idea. Then you're going to have to test it and be a bit businessy. And then you're going to launch it and work really, really hard for a year or two. And then you're probably going to grow it if it's success. And then you're going to need help. So you might employ people. You might then need to collaborate with others, maybe neighbours, maybe landscape scale. And then you're delegating. So you've come a long way over 3 or 4 years from an ideas person to a delegator who's very hands-off. And as we all know, farmers are really bad at letting go. We meddle all the time. And so you have to grow mentally with your business and your set of enterprises and learn new skills. I'm still not very good at any of that, as all my team would probably say. But yeah, you've got to try.
Andrew, I just want to, because we said that we would cover it, and it's not entirely the same as what we're doing here, but I do want to mention share farming and the opportunities for that. It is different from what Jonty's been doing. But so what is share farming, and how does that differ from what we've been talking about so far?
I mean, I think what we've been talking about is joint ventures in quite a wide scale, involving lots of different businesses. Share farming is normally a collaboration between two partners, quite often one that owns the land and the other one that's going to do the work. But I think the thing that makes sort of share farming quite different is that, yes, you share the occupation of the land and you share the risk of growing those crops or the profitability of that livestock. So it is important that there is that joint risk, and that's what sets it aside. There is a substantial risk from both parties, so they both got substantial skin in the game, and I think that's the important thing. And it does encourage. Well, you have to collaborate because you're dealing with things on a day-to-day basis, whether that's looking at what crops you're planting and how they're going to be paid for, or the sort of livestock that you're going to buy and manage. Share farming is a joint venture, but it's just about farming, but it is all about sharing that risk.
Martin, you must have lots of examples of this across the network. Might this be, as in share farming, be a good option for new entrant listeners?
I think it's a great opportunity, particularly if you haven't got a lot of capital value to add in, and you can grow a business without having to buy a whole load of infrastructure or access to land. And we're seeing great opportunities for that. And many people are traditionally got like an FBT, and they're moving those, if the landlord's wants to be actively involved, moving those into more of a share farm agreement, because you can look at the asset of the land, which is the most productive, we can crop or have the livestock, which is less, where do we get some income streams to deliver environmental services, where else can we stack things on? We've traditionally had a farm business model that is pretty linear and it's just output, and now we can look at it in a different context. And I think that's where it really gives farmers, landowners, landlords the opportunity to, how do we make a really viable farming business or opportunities from that landscape? And that's where individuals can say, actually, my skill is orchards, my skill is the wood, or my skill is looking after some sheep. How can I get involved in that area, grow a business, and then look at the future opportunities? And where can that sort of stack to something else?
George, your thoughts on this? And I'm always having in the back of my head, the sort of go and get a job mantra as well.
Yeah, well, Ben, when done well, share farming is indeed a really good option for new entrants. And share farming is essentially just a special form of joint venture where actually it's two separate businesses, both accounting separately for their returns and for their costs, who come together to work on a joint project, which is the farming of the land that is part of the agreement between them. So it is about, having a good relationship between those two businesses that wish to work together, having a solid agreement as to how those two businesses are going to operate, making sure there's clarity around what costs are being shared or what costs are being borne by each of those businesses, and how the profit is to be split between the two businesses. So it is a really good model, but I have to say, Ben, I find that it is talked about more than it is practiced. Okay. We see very few really, really good share farming agreements out there. But yes, it is an absolutely bona fide and good way for new entrants to come in, definitely.
Andrew, just before we go on to the next point, I just want you to come in on there as well, from what George was saying.
Yeah, I think the important thing is also with whatever agreement, whether it's a joint venture agreement or a tenancy agreement or anything, is to make sure that the agreement is right for the parties, and actually you are doing and delivering what is in the agreement. So calling it share farming and doing something different is not a good way to go, and exactly. So there is complete understanding. I think the good thing about share farming agreements is because both parties are stuck in it so much that they have that almost daily or weekly conversations about how units are going to be managed. And I think that is what really drives it forward. So it's not just sort of, oh, well, we'll engage now because something's cropped up within a tenancy agreement. you have much more regular meetings. I think that's why it works. And also it's a very good way of sharing the really big burden of going into a tenancy agreement, which is actually how are you going to find the capital to buy all your livestock, buy all your machinery, and then operate, till you sell your produce. A lot of that can be alleviated by a share farming agreement because you can share those costs.
Yeah, I love share farming for all those reasons. There is one inherent risk, though, that everyone should be aware of, is that we talk income, expenditure, profit, and profit share. It drives both parties to be depletive and to try and suck as much profit out of the system as possible sometimes. So just beware of that. I've not seen many that are truly holistic and deeper of thought. So the farmers and the young farmers I work with, I always say, put regenerative thinking at the heart of your share farm, your partnership, whatever it is, and ask yourself, does this enterprise, does the practice that I'm doing today deplete anything, or does it regenerate something? So is what I'm doing improving soil, improving biodiversity, enhancing water and nutrient cycles, improving the landscape, reconnecting with nature? Just make sure that's always the first thing you talk about at your Monday morning meeting, not what the profit share might be this week.
Okay. Just going forwards, there might be listeners who would like some further advice. So, Andrew, what professional help is available for anybody listening who would like some advice?
There's a huge amount of advice out there. Obviously, the trade organisations like the CLA will provide advice to its members. But there's a huge number of business consultants and chartered surveyors who have got a broad knowledge and will help you frame the agreements. And all firms and solicitors are also working hard to actually come up with agreements that meet the sort of new era. It is very much dependent on exactly what you want to deliver on the ground and then how you deliver that. So there is a lot of information out there, and it's, as always, it's choosing the right person for the right job.
And Jonty, for you, there's a huge amount going on your farm. But you being you, I'm expecting there's probably going to be more in future, perhaps. What does the future look like at Connie Green?
I think if you could narrow it down to one thing, it's about mentoring for me this year. We can go to lots of conferences, we can seek advice and consultancy and get people alongside us. But what we really need is mentoring for deep change over a period of time. And I'm finding that's what's having most impact. So there are some wonderful mentoring schemes out there right now. So I'm working with Pasture for Life on one right now. So I'd look for your local mentoring project and get involved, or join your local cluster group and mentor each other, peer-to-peer learning, and share that way.
Any final comments from anyone on the panel on either Jonty's story or on joint ventures?
I think, Ben, what I would say, just in terms of my final thoughts, is that I think what Jonty demonstrates here so ably is that you need both your head and your heart for this, and you can't do it with just one of those aspects. And it's about understanding what you're letting yourself in for and having the passion to allow yourself to be let in for what it is you're letting yourself in for. But I think as well, young people quite often think that they're invulnerable. And, Jonty was talking about how busy his place is and how busy it could be. And I think just going back to what he said about downtime, having time for family and friends is really, really important, not just for your mental health, but having time away from the business and from the fray is good in order just to give you a bit of perspective. So don't think that you are completely invulnerable. Is my bit of advice.
Yeah, look, I'll just add in there. I really think it is that change of thinking and having a different approach within your head and your heart, sort of thing. We do the business side. Most of us, we can work a spreadsheet out, but it's having a deeper understanding of where you're trying to get to and how those relationships with people work. Because if you're in a joint venture with someone, the relationship is really important. And also connect with other people in a similar situation so you have a support around you, whatever mentoring group, or whatever that connection is, because you will need support in sounding off and bouncing ideas about and sort of build that together. Don't feel isolated. Farming can be an isolated role sometimes, and it really shouldn't be if you're working with other people, and it's having those people to have support from and work with organisations that give you confidence.
Super. Vote for collaboration there. And Andrew, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, I think the thing that always strikes me is how free people are with their enterprise information. Clearly, not if you're in competition with your next door neighbour, but if there's plenty of people that will give you a real insight into their business and the way they run their businesses, and actually taking that experience that other people have encountered helps you build a much more resilient business. So yes, it is mentoring, but it's also actually wider connections with other people in other parts of the country who are doing similar sorts of things. And there is much more of a drive now for producing case studies and interesting collaborative working, more so now than there has been in the past. So I think there's potential for building much greater networks that actually will help everyone.
Super. So get out there, listeners, and increase your network. Go out and meet people. You never know what opportunity there is out there. We'll leave it there. But huge thanks to my panel today and to Jonty, of course, Jonty Brunyee, also to George, Martin and Andrew for coming on today. Thank you very much for listening. Please do talk about this podcast and share it with others over WhatsApp or socials if you get something from it. For now, though, I'm Ben Eagle. Thank you very much for listening, and the best of luck for your future career in agriculture, no matter what path you choose. This podcast was produced by Rural Pod Media for the National Federation of Young Farmers Clubs. The presenter was Ben Eagle, and there was further editorial support from Sarah Palmer. The podcast was supported by Defra.